Welcome to the Plan to Eat podcast, where I interview industry experts about meal planning, food, and wellness to help you answer the question, what's for dinner? Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Plan to Eat podcast. Today, I have an interview with Maddie from the YouTube channel Let's Eat Plants. Maddie has been a vegan for 6 years, and on her channel, she showcases how to save time and eat healthier with meal prep tips. So today we talked about her journey to veganism, what she thinks are some of the myths around veganism. She gives a bunch of tips for how to get started eating a more plant-based lifestyle. She also gives a bunch of meal prepping tips for produce and storage tips for produce to keep it fresher longer. This episode is full of all the tips and tricks related to fresh produce. Maddie is super knowledgeable on that topic, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Maddie, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So why don't we just get started by you having you say who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Maddie. I am a YouTuber and I love showing people how to save time and eat healthier thanks to meal prep.
That's awesome. And you are specifically vegan meal prep, right? Vegan lifestyle meal prep, right?
Yes, exactly. I've been vegan for 6 years. So there is kind of the emphasis of vegan eating on my channel. Although a lot of my viewers are not vegan, which they have told me. So it's also just like eating healthy and getting more veggies into your diet in general.
Yeah. What led you to make the lifestyle transition to only eating as a vegan lifestyle?
Great question. So I've been vegan for about 6 years, but actually our journey started more than 6 years ago. I think around like 2015, 2016, there were a lot of documentaries coming out about like health and environment. Like some of them are Forks Over Knives, Food Inc., Cowspiracy. So my husband and I went down this rabbit hole of like watching all of these documentaries. And like a lot of them do focus on health, but a lot of them also focus on the environment and animals. And we kind of just took all of this information in, and it was really eye opening because there's so much that is not really told to the consumer and things that I had no idea were happening in the animal industry. And so, like, there's a big important part of going vegan was for my health, but the main reason was really for the animals,
Mm.
which I don't really talk about a lot on my channel, to be honest, but that was definitely the catalyst, like learning all of these things about the animal industry. Just really opened my eyes, and it was like really heartbreaking to find out. You think you're
Yeah.
doing the right thing by buying things like free range or cage free, and come to find out that those labels don't actually mean anything. And yeah, I definitely encourage people to kind of do a little bit of research themselves. I don't like to scare people too much about it, but it's definitely eye opening because I think most people, they really don't know the truth.
Yeah. Well, nobody expects you to be the spokesperson for it. So,
Yeah, very true.
so was it just an overnight switch for you? Were you just like, we're going to be done eating animal products? Or did you kind of have to take some steps in order to get to eating vegan?
Yeah, so it was definitely gradual. So like I said, we kind of started in 2015, 2016, watching these documentaries, but it was not at all, like the next day we woke up and was like, boom, vegan. No, it was like, okay, here's all of this information. Let's start switching out meat products slowly, which actually was pretty easy for me because I was never a huge meat eater. But my husband, on the other hand, all of his favorites were meat. So, like, really learning how to switch those out was kind of a long process. In addition to like cheese, most people say I could never give up cheese. I totally get that because that was me as well. Like, it is super addictive. And we were living in Asia at the time. So we also had a big move back to North America. And we were like, okay, well, in North America, there's going to be a lot more vegan options at the grocery stores. Let's be fully vegan when we move back. So that was like end of 2017, beginning of 2018. And we've been vegan ever since. And the
Wow.
industry has changed a lot too. Like that was, a long time ago now. So even seeing all the vegan options expand from then until now has been like amazing to see.
Yeah. In general, I think that there's been a lot of progression in the food industry. I mean, you even think about like gluten-free things, like
Right.
15 years ago, you couldn't find anything in the grocery store that was gluten-free. And now it's like everything, there's always an alternative for that. So it's
Exactly.
all over the place.
Yep, definitely.
So you mentioned that cheese was a hard thing for you, but otherwise it wasn't as difficult for you as was for your husband. What do you think
Yes.
was the biggest challenge of switching over to not eating any animal products?
Definitely for me it was the cheese, but also just like learning new ways of cooking, I would say, because meat can be like a flavor enhancer. I guess it's in like a lot of soup stocks and stuff like that. My husband is a big soup fan. So like learning to replace those and also just like in baking, I'm a big baker. I was like, what do you replace for eggs? And it's not always like a one-to-one swap. You kind of have to learn new recipes in general. So, but I really enjoyed doing that as well. So it was a challenge in terms of like, I had never done these things before, but it was a fun challenge for me at least.
Mhm. Was there a part that felt easy about shifting your eating?
For me, yes, because, like, giving up meat, I was like, "Okay, I didn't miss it as much." That was probably the easy part, and I was already eating pretty healthy, like, with vegan, you don't have to eat healthy, but I wanted to focus on those full food, plant-based sources of, fiber and protein and all of those things. Yeah, like I was already eating pretty healthy and could just incorporate some beans pretty easily into my diet, some new grains into my diet, and I enjoyed that part.
So, what does your typical day look like as far as eating is concerned? Like, are you a 3 meal a day kind of a person? And like, what do those meals look like?
I am a 3 meal a day kind of person, plus maybe some snacks. I like to eat. So, like, usually we'll do Monday through Friday, we kinda do the same breakfast. We do oatmeal most of the time because it's really easy to batch prep. So, I'll cook it, like, at the beginning of the week, and then we'll eat that Monday through Friday. On the weekends, we're like, "Let's do some pancakes or waffles or tofu scramble, something a little more fun." And then lunch is usually like salad or wrap or taco bowl, something like that. And then dinner will be like pasta or soup or stew, stir fry.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so are you mostly making those foods from scratch, or do you find that there are a decent amount of, like, semi-homemade options for the meals that you eat?
I don't like to make too many things from scratch because I just don't feel like I want to dedicate that kind of time to making sauces from scratch and everything. You definitely could, but there's so many things that are what we call accidentally vegan, right? Like I go to the store and it's like the pasta sauce is already vegan, the stir fry sauce is already vegan. Throw some vegan cheese on there and you have a pizza. So, like, I would make something from scratch if I had to, but not my preference.
Yeah. Well, and probably by the time that this episode comes out, you will not be pregnant anymore, but you're pregnant. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And have your eating chat habits changed at all with being pregnant? Or is it just, are you eating the same as you were before? Is there anything that's shifted?
A lot of things have shifted because, pregnancy is pretty interesting in terms of eating. I did not give it enough credit. I was like, I'm going to eat super healthy throughout my pregnancy. It's going to be great. I'm already eating healthy. So I thought that I would be able to just continue on. But, first trimester, there are like the food aversions. I had some pretty bad food aversions. I didn't even want to eat oatmeal, which is like, I've been eating oatmeal for years. Like, I was so surprised. So it was just like first trimester, my appetite really decreased and just I kind of was focusing on anything that I could eat. I was still eating like pretty healthy, but mainly focused on like those starchy white carbs. bagels, fruit. I ate a lot of fruit. It was summer, so it was like perfect fruit season. And then second trimester, it was a lot more kind of back to normal, but also giving into like the cravings. The cravings is start coming in second trimester, which I had never experienced that before either. It's a different level of craving than, just like, oh, I feel like eating a burger. No, it's like, I need to have this.
Yeah.
So like we did a lot more takeout than we usually do during that time. And then third trimester, I just feel pretty full. Like, I think that, with baby growing and everything, there's not as much room in my stomach. But I have tried to maintain, like I said, kind of whole food sources of protein, calcium, what else? Omega 3s, all of the important ones. Like, in addition to the prenatal, I've just tried to, when I do eat, you know, a big meal or something, I try and make sure I have some of those sources in there as well to make sure I'm eating pretty balanced.
So if somebody was wanting to get started as have a vegan lifestyle, or maybe they just want to be more plant-based, you mentioned a lot of people who, watch your channel are not strictly vegan. Do you have some recommendations for where they would get started?
Yes, definitely. I always suggest for people to start small. Like start with simple swaps. For example, swapping out your plant milk or regular milk for plant milk. Like there are so many different kinds of milk alternatives nowadays. There's soy, almond, oat, hemp, pea, coconut, like really every kind of milk. So, like, if that's something that you drink in your coffee every day or in your cereal and you don't want to give it up, try a few different ones until you find one you like. Probably the first one you try isn't going to be the one you love, but, there's different options. And then also just like gradually incorporating more meals into your week and meals that you would normally eat. Like
Mm.
I mention pasta a lot because I think most people like a simple pasta with red sauce or something like that. And like that would be really easy to take the meat out. We do one with a bunch of veggies in it. And you can add in lentils for protein or some crumbled tofu, vegan sausages. There's a lot of different protein options nowadays. So, something like a lot of my friends are like, well, I don't want to eat kale salad every day. And I'm like, no, no, no. There's so many like different, just kind of take what you regularly eat and learn
Mm.
some recipes to swap for.
Mhm.
So, like, something else that I see quite often is that people come in thinking that they can just swap one for one right off the bat as well. Like, uh, they say, okay, well, I really like steak,
Mm.
So I'm going to go out and get a vegan steak and have it with mashed potatoes. And I'm like, there we have come a long way in the vegan food game, but there isn't always a perfect one for one swap. And as your taste buds are changing, you may want to kind of incorporate those foods into a recipe instead of just doing like a straight up one for one swap.
Mm.
So, like with burgers, for example, we have great vegan burgers nowadays, but other things people may taste a vegan cheese and be like, well, this isn't exactly what I was expecting. And I'm like, instead of that, try a vegan recipe that has been crafted to be perfect already as is. And, like the recipe developer has made that recipe probably without the faux meat or faux cheese. And it tastes really good as is. So if you try, one specific recipe that is made to be vegan instead of just swapping out those commercially purchased products, you may actually like the recipe a lot better.
Mm. I really like that tip because it also feels like there's a little bit of a mindset shift that needs to happen in there as well. That's like maybe if you were used to like a simple recipe being something like steak and mashed potatoes or steak and steamed broccoli or something like that, you might have to switch your idea of like what does a simple recipe look like that's vegan
Yes.
instead of just like a whole plate of meat.
Definitely. That was like a a huge mindset shift for us because I think, the standard American diet is like, okay, you got your meat, you got your maybe side of starch or carbs or something, and then a side of veggies, right? That's like the typical. little 3-portioned plate. So it definitely starts to look a little bit different with vegan foods, but I think it's, really fun to have some different recipes that people may have not tried before, and maybe trying cuisines from outside of your norm is also really good because there are a lot of other cuisines from other cultures that already have, well established vegan and vegetarian recipes in them that don't really require a lot of swaps. They're already delicious as is.
Well, that's a really good point because yeah, there are a lot of places like I'm thinking of Asian countries where it's like maybe the meat that they eat is predominantly fish. And so I would guess that there's a lot of recipes that's like, well, if we don't have any fish, like what is the alternative that we're going to be eating tonight instead? Like is it a soup with like a vegetable stock or something that was
Right.
homemade? Like, yeah, different kinds of things like that.
Yeah, definitely Asian cuisine, like, also doesn't have a lot of dairy
Mm,
use. So, that one's pretty easy to swap out. Like, once you get the meat swapped out, the rest is pretty easy. My
yeah.
husband is actually Chinese, but he was born in Vietnam. So like his mother, has taught me a lot of Vietnamese recipes, and those are pretty easy to veganize as well. So yeah, just learning about different recipes from different cultures has made the process and the switch a lot more delicious, I would say.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good tip. What's a myth that you think people have about being vegan that you don't think is true?
I'm gonna give you 2.
Okay.
The most common one is about protein. Like, if you talk to any vegan, I'm sure you have heard it before. Everybody asks a vegan where they get their protein. That is, like, the first question. And now, of course, there are so many sources. There's going to be, like, beans, legumes, lentils, seitan, tempeh, tofu, like, in addition to all of that, we have to look at the animals. Where are they getting their protein? They're getting it from plants, right? We're just cutting out the middleman by eating the plants directly instead of the animals. So yeah, definitely vegans don't get enough protein. They're actually vegan influencers who focus their social media accounts on like protein specific recipes. So I see, girls out there getting like 120 to 140 grams of vegan protein a day. So if that ever was a concern for someone or they wanted to follow a high protein vegan diet, there are a lot of people who talk about those protein recipes as well. So
Mm,
there's definitely options. The second myth I would say is that people automatically assume that vegan equals healthy.
mm,
So, I've had friends who they didn't really know what we could eat at first. And they're like, oh, you can't eat bread? You can't drink alcohol? Like, what is vegan exactly? So, within the umbrella of vegan, there are people who eat healthy. There's something called whole food plant based, which is usually what I personally lean towards. That is like, a more healthy version. You're getting the whole food kind of sources of the plant. And then there's like fruitarian, there's going to be people who eat raw. And then there's junk food vegans, right? Like Oreos and chips and all of those things are still vegan. So there's really a spectrum. And if you don't want to eat healthy and you still want to be vegan, that's totally an option. And I like to tell people that because I think, people assume that, oh no, I have to just eat like a smoothie every day and a kale salad or whatever, be super healthy. Like, no, anybody can come to veganism and eat their favorite foods from before and kind of do it how they want to do it.
that's a really good point. I think it's a like an eye-opening point in 2 ways that it's like there's maybe not as many barriers to entry towards veganism as a lot of people think, but then there's also the other side of it that's like you said, there are still junk food vegans. There are people who, are not eating animal products, but they're still eating all of the, like processed packaged food that in general we're told we should avoid for the most part,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, I like to do the 80-20 rule. So I'm like, I'm 80% healthy, but I'm always vegan. So I just leave room for vegan ice cream, treats like that, where I don't like to beat myself up over those.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's all about balance, right?
Right. So your YouTube channel is all about meal prep. Did you come to all of your different meal prep like skills and tips and tricks through being a vegan, or were these things that you had kind of cultured before that shift happened?
Definitely before. So a lot of them started actually with my husband because he is like Mr. Efficiency. I like if it wasn't for him, I would still be doing the same thing that I was like years ago, where you just chop everything and then cook it. I'm like, that's how you make food. What do you mean? He's like, there's got to be a better way because he hates cooking, right? He'll do it. He's good at it, but if there's a more efficient way to do it, he would much rather do that. So it actually started, we were really into health and fitness. This is before we were vegan. We were like going to the gym and we both worked really long hours. So we would leave for the gym at like 6 a.m. and then get home at like 6 or 7 p.m. And by the time you get home, you're just like, you're hungry, you want to eat something. And so it's either takeout or, spend half an hour or an hour cooking. And we're like, we need a way that when we get home, either something's ready to go or at least, prepped enough where we can throw everything into a pan and cook it up really quickly. So that was kind of how we started. And, we definitely have ebbed and flowed from that. We felt off the track. I would say we had like a big move back from Asia to North America. So we kind of took some time off during that time. We were also traveling a lot. And then my passion for meal prep kind of got reignited in 2021, right after COVID. You know, there was that period where everyone was staying home. I was like doing a lot of baking and I gained actually a lot of weight during 2020, during the COVID year. So I was like, I want to get back into healthy eating, healthy routine, lose a little bit of weight. And so I started meal prepping just to have like the healthy food ready to go.
Mm.
Because when you open your fridge and you see like a prepped meal, you're going to eat it. Like it's just the path of least resistance, right? So I was like, this is going to be the easiest way for me to get my health back on track. And so I kind of started sharing those meal preps on YouTube and people were like, "Hey, this is really helpful." And I'm like, "Okay, that's great. Let me let me do more for you guys." And that's kind of how YouTube evolved. Like my channel didn't start out that way, but that's kind of what it has evolved into.
Wow, that's so cool. So you've only been doing it for the last few years then?
Yeah, definitely.
Wow.
Like when we started, it looked a lot different than what it is now.
Do you have maybe like your top 3 like meal prep or food prep tips, that you'd wanna share with us that maybe are easy enough to explain over audio?
Definitely. Okay. I'm going to tell you all three and then I'm going to go back and explain each of them. So, number one, meal prep in a way that works for you. Number two, start simple. And number three, the freezer is your friend. Okay. So, the first one, meal prep in a way that works for you. I think a lot of people, when they first hear the term meal prep, they think pre portioned out meals that are like reheat and eat ready to go. So, you got like your rice, your protein, and your veggies in one little Tupperware, and you just reheat it and eat it for 5 days in a row, which is totally fine if you like that simplicity. But there are different ways to meal prep. There's something that I like to call a batch prep, which is where you make batches of, like a batch of rice and a batch of veggies, roasted veggies or something like that, a batch of raw veggies, a batch of beans, and you can combine them in different ways to make different kinds of meals throughout the week. So you don't have to eat the same thing over and over. And then even simpler than that, there's something that I call a wash and chop, which is like you get home from the grocery store and you just wash and chop your veggies and make sure that those are ready to go for the week. Because for me, I just hate washing and chopping veggies. So I'm like, if I don't have to do that anymore throughout the week, then I will eat those veggies. I won't end up wasting them and you're ready to go. You've set yourself up for the week. So meal prep in a way that works for you. You can try any of those different methods. My next tip, the start simple. Like I see people taking on too much at once. You get overwhelmed and like maybe burned out really easily. So I like to tell people to slow it down and then just start by meal prepping maybe 1 or 2 meals throughout the week, like maybe their breakfast, which is really easy to prep, or a dinner, make a double or a triple batch instead and just kind of eat that for the next few days and start slow with recipes that are easy and that that you like already instead of trying these like really complex 5 meals for 5 days, because it'll be too overwhelming for someone who's just starting out. And then my third tip, the freezer is your friend. I just love my freezer so much. I like, I can't believe how much I wasn't utilizing it before I started meal prepping. Like if you have overripe bananas, you can freeze them for smoothies or banana ice cream. Leftover soup, you can freeze and have a future homemade meal really easily. If you make pancakes on the weekend, you can make an extra double batch, freeze those for the following weekend. Beans, you can freeze into quarter cup portions, like into those muffin cups or like silicone soup cups, and then just pop those out and add them into a soup or a stir fry, something like that. So, like with the freezer, I just feel that you're really thaw and reheat away from like a delicious meal.
Yeah, I think that's a great one to remember. I don't utilize my freezer enough, and I'm constantly trying to, like, remember to put, like, extra portions in the
Mhm.
freezer, before it's the point of like, "Oh, well, we didn't eat that, now I need to throw it away."
Yep.
And I was digging through the freezer the other day and was like picked up this Tupperware and was like, "Oh, this is, like, so much rice," because I made, like, a double batch of rice and froze the second half of it and was like, "Oh, well, I guess I need to take this out so that we can use it."
Labeling is important too. If you're the
Yes.
kind of person who forgets, yeah, throw a little sticky tape label on there so that you don't forget when you made it and what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question related to your first idea. You were talking about that wash and chop method.
Hmm.
I'm curious, do you do like I'm thinking of like onions, like I feel like every single recipe I make has onions in it. And so, but like sometimes you just want you want like diced, really finely diced onions. Sometimes you want more like big chunky pieces of onion. What's your method of say you're like, okay, well, I have 5 onions that I know I'm going to need for recipes this week. Like, what's your
Yeah.
method? Do you just start with like, I'll just make everything big and chunky, and then when I go to actually make the recipe, make them finer, or do you? What's your method? I'm curious.
So I'm not a big stickler for following recipes. So I would probably just make them all the same size and use them like that throughout the week because it wouldn't bother me personally.
Hmm.
But funnily enough, onion is the one thing that I don't prep. I've done it before and like it lasts perfectly for a week. So there's no problem doing it. It's just one of the things that I really hate chopping. So, like, if I get out my food processor, which has chopping blades, I'll throw a bunch of onions in there and have those throughout the week. But I don't use that food processor with the chopping blades every week. So,
Mm,
usually, the onion will be the only thing that I will chop before a meal. And so for me, it's like everything else is ready to go. All I need to do is chop the onion. I don't mind to chop an onion right before I start cooking.
yeah.
It keeps it less stinky in the fridge as well.
Right.
So so for me, I would just take out the onion and dice it into whatever shape was needed. But
Right.
if you did want to prep it, I would say keep it chunky. And then right before you're about to cook everything, if you did want a finer dice, it would only take a minute or two to just finely dice those.
Okay. Good. Good thought about that because that is something I feel like I always struggle with. Like, I don't even know. Like, I have 5 onions. What am I even supposed to do with these? Um, so are you a meal planner as well? Do you plan for all of the food that you buy and then prep? Or like what's your meal planning process look like if you have one?
That's a good question. So I am not a big planner. I really prefer the batch prep method where you kind of just make a few different side dishes and combine them in different ways because we like variety. And just having done this for a while, we kind of have our staples on rotation. So I've become pretty good at like looking in the fridge and assessing, okay, we have a batch of rice. That means we can make congee. We can use it for a stir fry. We can use it in rice pudding. We can use it in a sushi bowl or just regular sushi rolls. So I feel like that's kind of just a skill that I have developed over the past couple years. But definitely, I'm trying to get better with the whole prepping part and like, sorry, I should say planning part, because that's something that I have always kind of struggled with. So actually using the Plan to Eat app has really helped me out with that because it, really forces me to look into the future of the week as like, hey, what do we want to eat? And I find that the week goes so much more smoothly when I have planned, even if I do a batch prep, still kind of having those ideas of, okay, well, we have the rice, so we can make these 3 dishes with it. And kind
Mm.
of scheduling those out in the planner has just helped me so much. And like, it's really, yeah, it's really changed my whole planning technique, I would say.
Oh, that's great. Do you mostly plan not from recipes and, like, your meal planner just serves as a reminder, or do you try new recipes sometimes and then you really wanna have them on the planner?
Yeah, so I mostly go by, what's already in my head, the ones that we have in rotation. But I am trying to incorporate more recipes, which is also why the app is really good because I am not joking. When I first signed up with the app, I had over 200 recipes saved in my Safari browser on my phone. Like, you can open different tabs, and I would just leave them open, and so I would go into Safari, and it's like, "You have 200 plus tabs open," and they're all recipes. So, I would just see like, with vegan recipes, you're like, "Oh, that looks really good. I wanna try making that. I've never done vegan ribs before." Like, "Wow, that looks awesome." So, you just save it, and then you never go back to it. But now with the app, when I'm doing my planning, it's like, okay, I have our staples of things that I know will be fast and easy to make, and I kinda add those in. But then I also have room for, like, the more fun ones to try out, which have been in my, you know, in my rotation forever, and I just haven't gotten around to making them. So, that's been really helpful actually to kind of be able to peruse recipes more easily, having them all in one place instead of on Safari has been great for me.
Oh, wow. You are not alone in that struggle. I think that we have so many people who find Plan to Eat and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that like I had all these recipes and there was no."
Yeah,
You just never I feel like when you find a great recipe, it's always because this looks really pretty or somebody
right.
recommended it to me. But then when you actually go to cook dinner or go grocery shopping, you're never thinking of that recipe in the
Exactly.
moment. And so, yeah, they just pile up and get lost. And I appreciate that about Plan to Eat a lot because yeah, when I was before, like way before I started working for Planty, I had so many recipes saved in my browser and it was like pointless because they were
Right.
never going to get made.
Exactly, yeah, and now it's like, "Okay, I'm craving a dessert. Let me go to the dessert category and scroll through and look for one that looks good." It's
Yeah.
awesome.
So then how often are you grocery shopping for fresh produce? Do you do it once a week or do you do more or less frequently?
We usually do around between 7 to 10 days. I've gotten it to a pretty good system, for that schedule. I've noticed that when something is on sale, especially like the heartier vegetables, so things like sweet potatoes, cabbage, carrots, celery, those last for a really long time. Usually, what I like to do is, let's say celery is on sale, I'll buy 2 or 3 bunches at once. And then on my meal prep day, which is usually Sunday, I will just wash and chop one of them and leaving the other two untouched. They will stay good in the fridge for at least another week, usually like multiple weeks, right? So, with that kind of system, we're going to the grocery store a lot less. Mainly it's for things like bananas ripen really quickly or we go through them really quickly. So we need to stock up on a couple of those items more frequently, but usually the produce rotation is around 7 to 10 days.
Mhm. Yeah, that's pretty good. And
Yeah.
then I know you talk about this a lot on your channel, but what are some tips that you have for keeping produce fresh? Particularly, I think after you've maybe like washed and prepped it, because I feel like there are some things that like an onion or something, like it does stay more fresh if you just leave it as its
Yeah.
whole onion. And then if you prep it, it's like you really do need to use it within the next, 5 days or something. Otherwise it gets kind of grody. So do you have any tips for keeping the produce fresh?
Yes, definitely. I have quite a few. Well, I'll go through a couple of them. So, for things like fruit, I've noticed that they ripen obviously really quickly on the countertop. So, if you wanted something to ripen quickly, I would leave it out. Usually, our bananas will help ripen things. So, bananas, oranges, avocados that I want to ripen, I would leave on the counter with those. And then anything that I don't want to ripen quickly, I put it in the fridge. So usually, like I said, I can buy 2 bags of avocados if they're on sale. I'll keep 90% of the avocados in the fridge, and I'll just take out 1 or 2 to ripen on the counter and kind of work those in a few days of rotation. So after maybe 2 or 3 days, take out another 1 or 2 avocados to ripen on the counter. And then you have like this never ending cycle of perfectly ripe avocados without having to have them all get ripe at once. That's the worst. So
Yeah.
that's kind of my fruit rotation. Most of it stays on the countertop if we want it to ripen. But if you don't, keep it in the fridge. With vegetables, um, it totally depends on the kind of vegetable. Things like carrots, celery, beets, those last a really long time in the fridge untouched. So usually, like I said, if I buy a huge bag of them, I will prep them on one day and they like a grated carrot will last in the fridge grated for about 5 days. So as long as I've done everything on the meal prep day in terms of my washing and chopping, that is enough food for that week, then it usually lasts for the 5 or 6 days. Pretty much perfect. But like leafy greens, you kind of want to be a little bit more delicate with them. They're not as hardy. Also, things like bell peppers and cucumbers, those kind of only last for maybe 2 or 3 days once they're chopped. So I like to kind of make sure that I'm chopping them right before I'm about to use them. And with lettuce, actually, greens, I have like a whole greens procedure with lettuce and herbs. I usually wash them and dry them off mostly, wrap them in a tea towel, and then store them in either a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware. And that kind of like a little bit of moisture from their stuck on the tea towel and helping them stay moist kind of makes their lifespan a little bit longer that way. I noticed that either people store them too wet or too dry, and I kind of find that like this light middle ground is really perfect for leafy greens and herbs too. But if you ever are in a place where your herbs have gone completely limp or your lettuce or chard or something like that have gone completely limp, the way to revive them is to soak them in ice cold water. So
Mm.
you can do a little ice cold water bath. Literally, I put some ice cubes in there and soak them for about 20 minutes, and that will completely revive them. And then you don't have to toss them out. So I like to tell people that because they're like, oh, my lettuce is wilted. I've had it in the fridge for a whole week. And I'm like, try and revive it first. There are ways to save it, or you can always just throw it in a smoothie if it's really it's really gone.
That's a really great tip. I find that, if I do happen to, like, make a salad and I've chopped romaine for it or something, leaving it inside my salad spinner does a pretty good job of keeping, like, already chopped lettuce good for a day or 2, and I think it's that, like, it gets just the right moisture level of,
Yes.
like, it's in the colander part, but there's still a little moisture maybe in the bottom that it's not, like, touching the lettuce
Exactly.
leaves. Yeah.
Exactly. And with lettuce, I would say also don't chop it too finely. If
Mm.
you were gonna leave it for a few days, I would leave the leaves more intact when you're wrapping them in a tea towel. And then the day you want to make your salad, it's just a 2-minute chop to get those leaves into your salad.
Mhm. Well, do you have a favorite recipe that you've had recently that somebody you think everybody would love, whether they're vegan or not?
Yes, I do. I have so many. No, I just made a really big batch of granola. And I was
Mm.
just thinking, like, this is one of those recipes that is so easy to make. Anybody can make it. It's a lot of pantry ingredients. So you probably have them on hand already. And it's very simple. You don't have to be an expert baker or anything to make it. And I think that store bought granola has to be one of the most expensive things I've ever seen. I went to buy some like a couple years ago and it was like $7 for this tiny little bag. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. So, homemade granola with a little bit of flax, ground flax, and maple syrup are really all you need. Those are like the three main ingredients. Well, the oats, obviously. Those are the three main ingredients. And then, of course, you can add nuts, you can add vanilla, a pinch of salt. Sometimes I like to do tahini in there for a little bit of extra flavor and or cinnamon if you wanted some spice in there. And then you just bake that for 20 to 30 minutes at 350. And you get these really big clusters, like everyone thinks that you need a lot of oil to make all of the oats stick together, but you can actually get these huge, delicious clusters that you can just break off and snack on. I just love granola.
Mhm, that sounds really great, and you're right, granola is really expensive, and I always feel like store-bought granola is like it's almost like a breakfast junk food when you buy it
Yes,
from the grocery store because there is a lot of extra stuff in there that you're like, "It probably doesn't need to have all those things, and it can still taste
definitely.
good."
Yeah. This recipe does have a fair amount of maple syrup, but that's what makes it delicious. So it's a little bit sweet, but really, really delicious.
That sounds great. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on YouTube and connect with you that way?
So on YouTube, it's Let's Eat Plants, and same with Facebook and Instagram. On Instagram, it's let's.eat.plants. And yeah, there's lots of meal prep tips, vegan recipes. And of course, I also have like an email newsletter with meal prep tips. So if people are interested, they can join that as well.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for joining me today. This was so much great information. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad to hear it. Thank you so much for having me, Ronnie.
As always, thank you for listening to this episode. There are links in the show notes to Maddie's YouTube channel, as well as where to connect with her on Instagram and her website, all the places. There's also a link to the video where she gives you the rundown of that yummy granola recipe that she talked about. And if you are enjoying the Plant Eat podcast, please give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible. Thanks for listening, and I will see you again soon.